Welcome everybody to the 8th annual Magnitsky Awards dinner. I just want to acknowledge a few people here. There's so many great friends, heroes, and so on, but I want to acknowledge just a few people before we get started. My whole life in the last 13 years and this event and very much what I've been doing all centers around Sergei Magnitsky, who was, as you know, my friend, my lawyer, my Russian lawyer, who was murdered in Russia in 2009, exactly 13 years ago. And every year on this day, the anniversary of his death, we try to do something to honor him. And for the last 8 years, we've been doing these awards where we recognize other people who have done amazing things, stood up to dictators. But what I wanted to just say is that it's a big surprise to me, but I just discovered that Sergei Magnitsky's wife is here with us tonight. She's sitting back there. What she has gone through and how she has worked with us to get justice is truly an amazing thing. I also want to point out that last year at this dinner, we gave the Magnitsky Prize to Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, and she couldn't accept the award because she was in prison in Iran, and her daughter Gabriella and her husband were here to accept the award on her behalf. But I'm really happy and proud to say that Nazanin is here with us tonight, and we're so happy that you're here. And then one more not such a happy note, which is that one of the award winners last year was Senator Kimberly Kitching from Australia. She was the person most intimately involved in getting the Australian Magnitsky Act passed. And suddenly, sadly, and tragically, she passed away earlier this year at a very young age, and it's a really total shock to me and to all of those who knew her that she was standing up on this stage last year, and she's no longer with us. But the Magnitsky Act in Australia is her legacy, and hopefully many people will be sanctioned and many lives will be saved from the work that she did. So I am not going to talk any longer because I want to make sure we all get to our awards. I'm very happy to say that for the 8th year running, we have my friend James O'Brien. Those of you who live in this country, he doesn't need an introduction. He's the voice on LBC that anybody who listens to the radio will know. For those who don't know him, he's not only a great radio commentator, but he's a big friend to the Magnitsky cause and a wonderful and entertaining individual who you'll get to know a little bit tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is 1 year since we were last gathered here to honour the memory of one remarkable man and respect the vision of another, Bill Browder. For the benefit of our overseas guests, perhaps I should explain that in the context of British politics, 1 year is currently equivalent to 3 prime ministers, 3 foreign secretaries, 4 home secretaries, and God knows how many cabinet ministers. But at least we took back control. There are highlights from the years that Bill has been doing this event, but it would be inappropriate to single any out. All I would say, perhaps, to cite a recent winner, Maria Ressa, who shortly after winning a Magnitsky Award went on to win a Nobel Prize. So if you are lucky enough to pick up an award this evening, there's no pressure at all. The first journalist, I think, since the 1930s to do so. Maria has a line that I think resonates as much as it haunts. And she says, you have to know what you are prepared to give up. some of the people that have been honored at the Magnitsky Awards over the years and some of the people that will be honored tonight are prepared to give up everything in pursuit of principle, in pursuit of truth, and in pursuit of freedom. And that, I think, is perhaps the single most important thought that we should hold all of us in our minds tonight as we rightly, and I hope somewhat joyously, honor some astonishing contributions to those three great aspirations, to principle and to truth. So, with no further ado, let us turn to the business in hand. And we'll begin this evening with the outstanding contribution to the Global Magnitsky Justice Movement Award. I'm not going to say anything this evening about the recipients. I have the honor and the privilege of introducing the people who are going to make the award. And our first presenter this evening is no stranger to either this stage or the global Magnitsky cause. Kyle Parker wrote, effectively, the original US law and then worked nights and weekends to get it through Congress, despite the energetic opposition of the trade lobby, the Obama White House. That's another thing I'd mention, actually. I find when I come to this event that there are, from the arena of British politics and media, there are people here quite often who I'd normally think of as enemies almost, or of on the other side of political debate, but there's even a Daily Mail journalist in the room. But one of Bill's great gifts is to recognize that what he pursues in memory of Sergei transcends all petty vendettas and petty political disagreements. If he thinks somebody can help him further this cause, this mission, then he will break bread with you. He will sign you up. He will invite you to this event. It's quite refreshing, in fact, to be able to turn off some of those impulses and recognize that, yes, the Obama White House was not the most helpful of administrations. And, of course, the Kremlin had a bit of a problem with the plan as well, if I recall correctly. Kyle is currently the Chief of Staff of the US Helsinki Commission in Washington, which is now focused exclusively on helping Ukraine defend itself against Russia's genocidal attack and the restoration of its 1991 borders. In fact, Kyle is possibly the most well-traveled US official in Ukraine since February the 24th, having made, I think, 5 trips to the war zone, including one last month where he toured the front line from Kherson to Kharkiv and is planning to return next month. And as I mentioned, Kyle Parker will tonight be presenting the award for the outstanding contribution to the global Magnitsky Justice Movement.
Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you, James. What a honor it is to kick off tonight's wonderful evening with a most distinguished honoree who just a few years ago, a young, energetic member of the Czech Pirate Party, joined our righteous cause, tenaciously championing a Czech Magnitsky law through the Chamber of Deputies. In fact, it passed just last month. It's on its way to the Senate, and we expect will be law by the end of the year. Somewhere along the way, he also happened to become his country's foreign minister. Over and above the strenuous objections of the Czech president. But unlike so many whose moral clarity is dimmed as they ascend to higher office, our honoree not only stuck to his principles, he redoubled his efforts, and has his tenure as foreign minister coincides with this most dangerous moment for European and global security. And we are all, I think, grateful that he is continuing to provide vigorous and dynamic leadership to the cause of justice and freedom. And just by way of example, the Czech Republic, small geographically, right at the center of Europe, was the first NATO country to send tanks to Ukraine, has given nearly 10% of its defense budget in military assistance to Ukraine. By comparison, the United States has given almost 4%, and the UK has given almost 7%. And just this week, Russia was officially recognized in the Czech Republic, rightfully recognized, as a terrorist regime. And so it is my distinct honor to invite to the podium His Excellency Jan Lipovsky, Foreign Minister of the Czech Republic.
Madam Magnitsky, dear Bill, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm extremely honored to be receiving this award and to share this privilege with such an outstanding and impressive group of people. Thank you very much. It is very humbling for me to be alongside those who put their lives and livelihood and on the line to defend human rights, to expose the world to atrocities committed by powerful individuals and groups while standing for peace and justice. You have my utmost admiration. Tomorrow, November 17, we will commemorate the 33rd anniversary of the Velvet Revolution in Czechia that led to the fall of communism and return of democracy to, at that time, former Czechoslovakia. The leading figure of the pro-democracy movement, respected human rights defender and later our president, Václav Havel, once said, "Our indifference towards others can after all result only in one thing, the indifference of others towards us." And this was a principle that guided me when, as a member of the Czech Parliament, I launched a campaign for the adoption of a Magnitsky Act. It was a couple years ago. And we wanted to show the Czech people and the world that we care, that we are not indifferent to the suffering of others. I believe that this idea expressed by Václav Havel should guide us in all our endeavors, especially for those of us who are in positions of power. And finally, this award is not only about me. I would like to thank all who worked with me over the past years to make this bill and make this valid law. Because without their support, expertise and cooperation, our Czech version of Magnitsky law would never be on its way to becoming part of the legislation in my country. And I hope that it will inspire others and help them, to motivate them to similar efforts in their countries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bill, for doing these activities and for your motivation, which you gave me through years we have been working on this all together. Thank you very much.
I think perhaps the single most important duty I've ever performed on this stage was at last year's ceremony when I was entrusted with the task of bringing on the box upon which one of our guests would stand in order to deliver one of the best speeches I've ever heard. The person who stood on that box is here this evening. I speak of Gabriella Zagari-Ratcliffe, who was here to accept an award on behalf of her mother, who, as Bill has mentioned already, is able to step onto the stage herself this evening. And I checked earlier, very surreptitiously, Nazanin, you don't need a box, do you? You'll be aware, of course, that while visiting her family in Iran in 2016, Nazanin was detained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and held hostage for 6 years. It was, as I mentioned last year, that she was awarded the Magnitsky Award for Courage Under Fire, and the award was received by her husband Richard and their daughter Gabriella. She was then released in March of this year. And tonight, I'm delighted to tell you that she will be in person presenting the Magnitsky Award for Outstanding Young Human Rights Activist.
Good evening. It is an honor for me to be here tonight, and I would like to thank Bill for inviting me and my family, and also for organizing this event. Apologize for my croaky voice. Last year today, I was sitting in my parents' home in Tehran, watching my daughter Gabriella picking this award, which was very kindly given to me. We were all awaiting freedom after 6 years, nearly 6 years of waiting, and we were separated from each other all that time. It is remarkable and also hard to believe what 1 year can bring. We were finally reunited and we were free together. What we went through as a family, as also as individuals, no one should ever be put through. We are delighted and we are humbled by all the support and care of people who stood by us and reminded us that we are not alone and we are not forgotten. However, as the story of my release ended, there are still many people around the world, and as we particularly see in Iran these days, similar stories are happening to many people. Some of them are experiencing even worse stories. Our battle does not and will not end with my release. It might change its form. This is where Magnitsky sanction and also Magnitsky legislation will actually help people who are struggling like I was at the time to be more hopeful. And this will bring hope for those who are struggling at the moment and they're in the middle of it, battling for justice and accountability. The situation of human rights in many countries, specifically in Iran, has declined over the past years. Over the past 2 months, men and women in Iran have been defying the repressive rules imposed on them. The human rights condition in Myanmar, however, has drastically deteriorated over the past couple of years, but specifically after the February 2021, when the coup d'etat happened. Since then, the freedom of speech and right for peaceful protest has been restricted, and the pressure on ethnic minority groups has been increased. This had led to many arbitrary detentions, torture, and killings of people in custody. It is an honor for me and a privilege to present the Outstanding Young Human Rights Activist Award tonight to Thinza Shunlei Yi. Thinza is a democracy activist from Myanmar. She's the advocacy coordinator for the Action Committee for Democracy Development. She publicly advocates against the military junta since the February 2021 coup d'etat and the oppressive system for the ethnic and religious minority in Myanmar. She received the U.S. State Department's Emerging Young Leaders Award in 2016 and the Women of the Future Southeast Asia Award in 2019. Currently, she's running a global campaign called Sisters to Sisters to raise awareness about the abuse and the violence against women. The campaign started in response to the reports of torture and sexual violence experienced by those in prison in Myanmar. In solidarity with Myanmar women, they work with civil society groups to promote human rights and democracy during the revolution, and to be the women's voice and bring international awareness to the violence against women. She cannot be with us here tonight because of complications over travel, but I think we're going to connect to her through the screen.
Hello. It is such a great honor and a privilege to accept this award. Let me begin by thanking Nazanin for her kind introduction. She's a remarkable example of the bravery and compassion we need in the world. There is also a certain awkwardness and sadness on such occasions because this award reminded me of our constant struggle as human rights defenders in Myanmar. And my friends who are J and K and those who have had to sacrifice more than I have. Also, it's a joy that we are now here celebrating the works of human rights defender, including Sergei Magnitsky today. And yes, I would love to be there with you in person, meeting with all of you, but instead, I'm speaking to you from a laptop thousands of miles away. The distance between us reflects the limbo or tens of millions of Myanmar people now find themselves in. And despite the borders, political charges, or time differences, I'm still speaking to you virtually and in solidarity with you all. This also reflects that there is always a way if we have a will. Today marks 655th day since our revolution. The junta killed more than 2,400 people and jailed 13,000 people in their coup attempt. We too knew well that the military in Myanmar will not hesitate to commit another crime after a genocide 5 years ago. Despite all risks, we strive on organizing a right-based action on the ground, raise awareness and solidarity among the oppressed towards Launju federal democracy. We've been calling for targeted sanctions on Myanmar oil and gas, MOGE, and state governments like the UK and the US refrain to take a real bite against the junta. So generations of thinkers, activists, and advocates before me have sacrificed to show us how to think clearly about human rights and democracy, and to make those part of our reality. To all of you listening to me now, please remember this. The hard-fought rights of democracy, of the freedom to think, to write and to speak, to practice your chosen religion, the freedom of assembly and association, of privacy, and to peace. These are all fragile. It took centuries for these human and civil rights to be established, but now they can be swept away in no time at all. Now we are seeing a right-wing, anti-democratic, racist, and patriarchal movement proliferating around the world. Now we couldn't afford to look away from even mild symptoms of fascism or racism at home or in parliament. And that's why we need constant awareness, solidarity, and proactive defense of human rights in all our society, across generations and borders. I'm humbled and privileged to be recognized for the work I have done with farmers, workers, village leaders, ethnic and religious minorities, and students. To me, awards are symbolic. Let us not take comfort in them, but let them make them more uncomfortable. A reminder that there is so much work still to be done. Again, thank you for letting me know. My colleagues know that someone is listening. In my last but not least note, I like to say I stand firmly in solidarity with human rights defenders around the world, especially with our sisters and brothers in Ukraine, Belarus, Iran, and Afghanistan. I look forward to working with many of you in the near and long term. Thank you.
It's time now for the Outstanding Lawyer Award. There are several outstanding lawyers in the room, and it's probably an appropriate moment to reflect upon the fact that when the Magnitsky Awards began, they focused exclusively upon people who were part of the fight against Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin. Now, as is clear, the remit of the awards and the remit of Bill's honouring of Sergei's memory extends to all corners of the world. And one of the things I'm always reminded of on this evening is the international nature of the law, the way in which it is often the last bastion, the last line of defence against oppression, and of course the introduction of Magnitsky sanctions in various countries now is a reminder that although we might find some lawyers a little overbearing and possibly occasionally even a little pompous, the work that they do is of desperate and profound importance. And it is the job this evening of Mark Ellis to present the Outstanding Lawyer Award. He is, of course, the Executive Director of the International Bar Association, the Chair of the United Nations-created Panel on Defence, Council of the International Criminal Tribunals, a member of the Magnitsky Awards Committee, and himself an international criminal law expert. Mark was legal advisor to the Independent International Commission on Kosovo and advised on the creation of Serbia's War Crimes Tribunal. He travelled, like a lot of people here this evening. He's been in Ukraine since the offensive began. He was there in September to meet with local lawyers and government officials to discuss these mechanisms that will eventually, we all hope, hold Russia to account. The IBA, the International Bar Association, is now working with the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine to develop mechanisms for prosecuting the war crimes about which we learn more almost every day at the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage to present the Magnitsky Award for Outstanding Lawyer, Mark Ellis.
James, thank you very much. Bill, thank you for all you do. As Russia violates the most sacred principle of international law, the territorial integrity of a sovereign nation, the role of the International Criminal Court is becoming increasingly critical. Fatou Bensouda is a giant in her field. Born in the Gambia, she's an acclaimed lawyer and has had an extensive and truly remarkable career as an international lawyer. The pinnacle of Fatou's career was being selected by the Assembly of State Parties as the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, which she served from 2012 to 2021. She was the sole African candidate and the first prosecutor in the court's history. As prosecutor, Fatou was the voice for the voiceless, the victims of atrocity crimes. She alone dramatically expanded the number of the court's investigations and preliminary examinations. But in addition to all of that, she did something extraordinary. She prosecuted traditionally less focused crimes, such as sexual and gender-based crimes, crimes against children, and the destruction of cultural heritage as per the Rome Statute. And Fatou's time in the office was not without significant challenges. Notably, in 2020, U.S. President at that time, Donald Trump, issued an executive order declaring a national emergency and authorizing assets to be frozen, not only against her, but all family members and a ban of travel for the court's personnel. You simply cannot make that up. The U.S. imposed direct sanctions against Fatou, but she was not deterred. In her own words, she said this: "Something I've experienced is pressure, attacks, and politicalization. But what we do in office is critically important. History will judge us. Fatou has rightly received numerous awards and accolades, too many to list tonight, but perhaps the most prestigious until tonight's award was in 2021, her office was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And finally, on a personal note, Fatou, as a prosecutor, always had time for civil society. I lost count of the number of meetings I had with her, always gracious, always open to new ideas, even when I had criticisms. And each time I left her office, I said to myself, how fortunate we are to have her in that position. She personifies the very best of the legal profession. Please join me in acknowledging Fatou Bensouda as the 2022 Magnitsky Human Rights Awardee for Outstanding Lawyer.
Thank you. The Hermitage Capital Management, distinguished members of the jury, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, your excellencies, fellow awardees, dear friends and colleagues, allow me at the outset to express my most sincere gratitude to the Hermitage Capital Management for hosting the Sergei Magnitsky Human Rights Award and for their generous recognition of my work through this award, Outstanding Lawyer Award. I am sincerely touched and honored that the prominent people, such as Mr. William Browder, who founded and make up this impressive group, has considered me worthy of this prestigious award. I'm also grateful to the members of the jury for finding me fitting of this award and for selecting me to receive it. I accept this honor as a recognition not of my humble achievements, but rather of the importance and the promise of international criminal justice for a more just and peaceful world in this new century, and the crucially important role that we all have and must continue to play towards these necessary goals. Goals indeed rendered all the more pressing as we lay witness to great human suffering around the world today, from west to east and north and south. Ladies and gentlemen, one cannot remain silent and indifferent in the face of atrocities. Never again, regrettably, continues to ring hollow in so many conflicts. We don't seem to learn the lessons of the past and continue to allow unbridled violence to cause great human suffering. As the former prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, I have done my best and will continue to do whatever I can to help restore dignity to the shattered lives of the survivors of atrocities. I have been witness to the consequences of armed conflict on the lives of women and girls, in particular. In the courage and dignity of victims and survivors, I have seen human nature at its best. And in the sheer brutality of crimes against them, I have seen it at its very worst. Sexual and gender-based crimes, violence, is sadly characteristic of so many conflicts, often perpetrated as a deliberate weapon of war or repression. We see this obscene reality in too many conflicts we are witnessing today. Women and girls are often doubly victimized. Not only do combatants see their bodies as legitimate battlefields, but their own communities then reject and ostracize them for what they have endured. We must do better. Our civilization must do better. How can it be that we continue to witness such beastly violence and inhumanity in the so-called modern age, when we pride ourselves for the progress humanity has made in so many areas, and yet our propensity towards violence against our fellow human beings remains cruel and unchanged, and even more destructive with modern weaponry? Dear friends, the era of impunity for atrocity crimes must belong to the dustbins of history. While the challenges are many, with strong, consistent, and vocal support of all those dedicated to advancing the international rule of law, I am confident progress can be made. And here again, I would like to emphasize the importance of women empowerment and women leadership. Having more women leaders effectively means increasing the representation of important groups of human society that have historically been marginalized and silenced. It means that a group that has rarely made decisions that have led to violence finally has a voice at the negotiating table. Women leaders have a crucial and powerful perspective to bring to the table in leading the fight against violence. We need to increasingly amplify women's voices and ensure they are in positions of power and decision-making. I truly believe this can make a positive difference. Dear friends and colleagues, let me also emphasize that seldom have major advances in human progress traveled the path of least resistance. The fight against impunity will have its successes, it will have its challenges. Some 10 years ago, when I assumed office as the first woman prosecutor of the ICC, I stated that real justice is not a pick-and-choose system, and that to be effective, to be just, and to be a real deterrent, the Office of the Prosecutor's activities and decisions must be based solely on the law and the evidence. The court may operate in a political environment, but its work must be shielded and free from the winds and whims of politics when those strengths are not aligned with our collective obligations under the Rome Statute. And during my tenure, I did my utmost to live by these convictions in the service of the Rome Statute. I strove throughout my term to honorably and with integrity discharge a complex, multifaceted mandate with independence and impartiality, and without fear or favor. I sought to focus on the words, not to focus on the words and propaganda of a few influential individuals whose aim is to evade justice, but rather to listen to the millions of victims who look to the court as a beacon of hope, as the last bastion of justice and accountability for atrocity crimes, where the law, their protector, had otherwise fallen silent. We must remain vigilant to ensure that international criminal justice remains principled and objective and is not co-opted as a convenient instrument in the service of politics. That is the only way to ensure international criminal justice can contribute to the progress of humanity and a higher civilization for future generations. For me, it was critical to continue to stand firm in our resolve and speak with one voice that the commission of mass atrocities as merely politics by other means will no longer receive a pass, and that the perpetrators, irrespective of their rank or official status, must answer for their crimes. We must continue to work for the victims of atrocity crimes who look to the court as the last beacon of hope. Its defense must indeed be equally strong, if not stronger, even when the court's activities might not always be politically convenient. This is, after all, at the heart of why the court was originally founded, that atrocities that shock the collective conscience must be subjected to the power of the law and legal scrutiny. For the sake of victims of atrocity crimes, we must not lose the progress made towards the culture of accountability as an essential pillar of a rule-based multilateral order. We cannot undo the suffering of the past or the horrors of history, but we must have a joint responsibility not to repeat them. International justice, as well as international human rights law, have thrived in the second century. To be clear, mass crimes still occur far too frequently, and indeed, the International Criminal Court is a direct answer to the continued commissions of atrocities and violations of human rights throughout the world. Nevertheless, and this is very important in my view, the paradigm has shifted. It has become universally accepted that all human beings have inherent rights and dignity. It came to be universally believed that the human rights and dignity of each one of us must be protected for the dignity of that individual, but also for the good of all. In our times, humanity no longer accepts that victims of gross human rights violations suffer in silence. We, as peoples and nations of the world, embrace the notion that no longer should the perpetrators of the world's most heinous crimes be allowed to escape justice. Such a powerful idea. This is the world I believe in, and it's one in which many of you today also believe in. Yet, ladies and gentlemen, today we are facing immense challenges. Dark forces and extremism aim to divide our societies and are resolved to live up to the promises of accountability and human rights and dignity for all. Human rights and the fight against impunity are under a unique attack. Our new century has already seen countless destabilizing conflicts around the world, resulting in great losses in innocent blood and national treasure. Regrettably, each year, countless children, women and men are either affected or they fall victim to unimaginable atrocities and extremism. Grave crimes in many conflicts around the world shock our collective conscience and threaten the peace, the security, and the well-being of the world. And today, it is thus more important than ever that we curb the destructive impact of conflicts and rising extremism on civilians. Today, it is more important than ever that we stand up against the erosion of human rights. Today, it is more important than ever that we do not cave in to the pressures of state power plays and realpolitik that aim to do away with international criminal justice. Today, it is more important than ever that we do all we can to ensure that security, stability, and the protective embrace of the law become a reality to be relished by all in all corners of the world. Under the critical watch of history, we must not allow never again to ring hollow to taunt the memory of the victims of atrocity crimes. We owe it to ourselves, to our children, and the future generations to nurture the international criminal justice projects and human rights. Ending impunity and bringing justice to victims of atrocity crimes are not the preserve of any one institution. It is a common goal and aspirations that tie us all together in our shared quest for justice, peace, and stability. Only together will we achieve what we have set out to do and create a culture of accountability. I've been too long, but before I close, allow me to acknowledge and appreciate the support of my husband, who is present with us, and my family, as well as the staff of the ICC with whom I worked with, who were by my side throughout. I am equally grateful to my Deputy Head of Mission, who is also present here today, and the staff, my entire staff at the Gambia High Commission. I thank you for the gift of your listening, your time, but I thank you very much for this prestigious honor.
Our next presenter doesn't need much of an introduction. He is our host this evening, but I suspect most people in the room probably have a Bill Browder story. I'll just share mine very briefly, if I may. If you present radio programs, and I suspect this holds true anywhere in the world, if you present radio programs to which members of the public are encouraged to phone in, if your producer comes up to you after the show and says something like, "Oh, there's someone who really wants to speak to you in private, they don't want to come on air," the best reaction you can have is to run at 100 miles an hour in the opposite direction. So some examples of what those people might want to tell you include that the royal family are actually lizards, and I can prove it. The moon landings never took place, and we had one chap who rang in on a regular basis claiming to be absolutely certain that he knew where Lord Lucan was. So when I was told that someone called Bill Browder, having caught some of my broadcasting about 10 years ago, was keen to talk to me in private, well, thankfully I used Google and realized that this was a very special person who was almost certainly not going to talk to me about lizards or moon landings. He did tell me the story of Sergei Magnitsky, who, as most of you here tonight will know, 13 years ago tonight was murdered after a ludicrous incarceration for the crime of having highlighted and unveiled appalling abuses by Russian officials. He was working for Bill Browder at the time, and since that night, I think it's fair to say that Bill has dedicated his life to ensuring that Sergei's death was not in vain. The Magnitsky Act, named in Sergei's memory, has now been adopted across 35 countries. He is possibly the only person in the world who has successfully made the transition from hedge fund manager to human rights activist. I hope I'm wrong, but last time I checked, there weren't many people following him up that path. But it's never too late. After the death of Sergei, Bill could obviously have moved on to other things, but instead, at great personal risk, I remember hearing from him once when he was in the back of a police car in Barcelona. I think you even came on the radio show to talk to us. And it's this constant risk that he lives with now that is testament to the courage that he continues to display in memory of his friend. He's also the author of 2 best-selling books, Red Notice and Freezing Order, describing these experiences over the last 13 years. And tonight, Bill will be presenting the Magnitsky Award for Outstanding Human Rights Activist.
So as James presented, I'm kind of an unusual human rights activist. And the person that I'm going to introduce you to tonight, I would say is also an unusual human rights activist. So I belong to a club that most people wouldn't want to belong to. It's the club of people who have been chased by dictators with red notices. Red notice is an Interpol arrest warrant. And of course, my first book was called Red Notice. I made a big deal about this, and I think over Twitter, this person from America, who I didn't know, named Enes Kanter, got in touch. He said, "I've got a red notice against me." And his red notice was issued because he had been critical of the Erdogan regime in Turkey. And Erdogan had been chasing him all over the world trying to arrest him. And that made it for a very inconvenient life because Enes is a professional basketball player and needed to travel to Canada and various other places. And we got to be friends over email and text and so on and so forth. And eventually he was able to solve his red notice problem. And one day he called me after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, and he said, I'd like to use my platform and my profile to highlight the terrible atrocities that are going on in Ukraine. And Enes had built up a platform of effectively being as a professional basketball player. Everybody was watching him in these games. He was playing for the Boston Celtics, and they would watch him on TV, and he had these white shoes, and he would paint different things on his white shoes. And so he started to, he became famous by saying, free Tibet, free the Uyghurs. And the whole world was watching. And guess who was getting upset? The Chinese. Because they have such thin skin that they can't even handle a professional basketball player writing on his shoes, free Tibet, free the Uyghurs, free Hong Kong, etc. But he called me up and he said, I want to do something for Russia. And so we ended up coming up with an idea of putting on one side free Ukraine and on the other side free Navalny. And he said, who should design these shoes? And it turns out that Sergei Magnitsky's son, Nikita, is an artist. He's training to be a professional artist. And so Nikita put together these beautiful shoes that said free Ukraine, free Navalny, and we had actually bought tickets for the game. I think it was the Celtics versus the New Jersey Nets, and all ready to go. Nikita and I were going to be there. Enes was going to wear them on the court. The whole world was going to be watching. It was going to be a big deal. And then 2 days before the game, Enes was fired from professional basketball. Not for what he was about to do with Russia, but for offending China. There's very few people in the world that are ready to risk their careers. And I should say this is not just a normal career. This is something that every tall young man, they won't want to be basketball players. They make millions of dollars. Everybody loves them. It's the best thing in the world to be a professional basketball player. Enes Kanter Freedom, he added freedom to his last name when he became an American citizen. Enes Kanter Freedom was ready to risk all of that glory, all of that money for his principles. And that is something that we need to applaud and award. And so I'm very proud, Enes Kanter Freedom, to award you the Outstanding Human Rights Activist.
This is always a problem for me. I need to adjust this. It's way better. First of all, I just want to say thank you guys so much. Thank you, Bill, for your friendship, for your support, and for your leadership, because you've been such a good friend and a good mentor for me throughout the years. And thank you, my good friend Thor, and thank you, everybody. Thank you for Madam Magnitsky. But I just want to, start with, I'm honored and humbled to be here. I remember my whole life, all I cared about was playing basketball and having fun with my teammates. That was just my childhood dream to become an NBA player. My activism actually started back in 2013. I think this is just, okay. 2013, for the first time, there was a big corruption scandal happening in Turkey. And, like Mr. Brother mentioned, President Erdogan and some of his family members were involved in it. And that was the first time I said something, because he was going around and shutting down media outlets and putting innocent journalists in a jail, whoever wrote about this scandal. And I, as a basketball player, I literally put a very simple tweet out there. and it became a conversation because of the NBA platform. And I was like, even one little simple tweet can affect this much. From now on, I'm going to start paying attention about what's going on in my country more. So I started to study. You know, my teammates were going out to bars and clubs. I was going back home and started to study about what's going on. And obviously, the things that I talk about affected me and my family. You know, when you fight against a government like Turkey, they're going to do everything they can to silence you. You know, my dad was a scientist and he got fired from his job. My sister was going to a medical school for 6 years. She still cannot find a job. I think the saddest one was my little brother, because he was playing basketball and he wanted to be like his big brother and become an NBA player, but he was getting kicked out on every team because of the same last name. You know, my family was getting affected so much, they had to put a statement out there publicly and said, we are disowning NS. And I remember going to a practice that day. It was definitely one of the toughest days in my life. And then after that, you know, Turkish government didn't believe that. They came to my house and they took every electronics away, phones, computers, laptops, iPads, because they wanted to see if I am still in contact with my family or not, but they couldn't find no evidence, but they still took my dad in jail for a while. And then right after that, you know, obviously, like he mentioned, you know, they put my name on Interpol list and my passport was revoked. But all these things were happening. I remember just last summer, I was doing a basketball camp in New York, and I was taking a picture with these kids one by one, and I took a picture with this kid, and his parents called me in front of everybody and said, how can you call yourself a human rights activist when your Muslim brothers and sisters are getting tortured and raped every day in concentration camps in China? And I'm still smiling for the camera. And I turned around to that parent. I was like, I promise I'm going to get back to you. So I canceled everything that day. I went back to my hotel. I started to study about what's going on. And what I, you know, read that day was unbelievable. But obviously on the internet you can find all kind of news, but I wanted to, you know, fact check it. I called my manager. I was like, hey, listen, I need you to find me a concentration camp survivor where I can sit down and talk to, which he found. You know, it was a woman. We sit down and had a 1-hour conversation, and she was telling me about I don't want to go into too much details, but the torture methods. She was telling me about the gang raping. She was telling me about all the sterilization and abortion and organ harvesting. I was like, I don't care how much money is involved, how much business involved, or whatever they can offer me. This is bigger than basketball, you know? So I promised, I asked her at the end of our conversation, I was like, how can I help you? She said, I'm good. I don't need you to help me. Then I was like, then why do we have this conversation? She's like, I'm in America. I feel safe here. I can eat whatever I want, go wherever I want, but there are 3 million people in concentration camps getting tortured and raped every day. Help those people. So at that moment, I promised myself, I was like, whatever it takes, I'm going to help those people. I wanted to do it in a very unique way. I mean, the shoes that you guys have seen, whenever I was a kid, whenever I watched an NBA game, the first thing I was looking was the shoes. What color, what brand, if they're comfortable. The next day I was waking up and telling my dad, please buy those shoes for me. So I come up with this idea, we come up with this idea with Human Rights Foundation. I was like, let's reach out to these artists around the world who've been oppressed by their government, and let's give them this project where they can put all the struggles, everything on the shoes, and we go out there and play. And there's no rule against it in NBA. So we did that, and right before the game, my first game, right before the game, it was a minute left, and 2 gentlemen came from the NBA and said, take those shoes off. And I was very shocked. I was like, what are you talking about? He said, you cannot wear those shoes because you've been getting so much attention by internationally. And it was the perfect moment because I was just getting ready for my citizenship test, right? So I closed my eyes. I'm like, okay, there are 27 amendments. My first amendment, freedom of speech. I was like, no, I'm not taking them off. It was the funniest thing. So that game, that halftime, right? Halftime, I played 0 minutes and a half in the first half. And the first half, I went back to my locker room. I looked at my phone, there was thousands of notifications. I clicked on the one that my manager sent me. He said, every Celtics game is banned in China. It literally took China for 24 minutes, first half, for the first quarter, 12 minutes, and second quarter, 12 minutes, 24 minutes to ban every Celtics game in television. I was like, well, that clearly shows my point, So that game I played 0 minutes, and right after the game, one of my teammates walked up to me and said, "You know this is your last year in NBA, right? Have fun with it, smile, because you're not going to get another contract after this." And I was very shocked. I was like, wow, I talk about human rights, but just because I was standing up for those innocent people, they were telling me that they were going to just let me go. And that happened. You know, in February, I got let go from my job, and right after I got let go, I've been playing in the NBA for 11 years. I got hundreds of teammates, hundreds of coaches and stuff. I called them for support, and none of them answered me. I used to call them my brothers. Not one of them answered me because they were scared of too much of losing endorsement deals, shoe sales, jersey sales. They wanted to get another contract, and that broke my heart. Since today, you know, they have not answered me yet. But I mean, with that being said, so the last 8-9 months has been very, very lonely. You know, I talk about the problems were happening in China. I pretty much lost my career. I talk about the problems were happening in Turkey. Last time I saw my family was 9 years ago. But then I come to these kind of events. You know, I used to pray every night. I was like, God, please let me see my family one more time, you know, because I haven't seen them for 9 years. But then I come to these kind of events and I see so many people who are sharing my stories, who are having the same struggles. I was like, well, God has answered my calls. You know, I just see you guys as my family because you guys are, whatever I'm going through, I can see that in your eyes too, and your support means so much to me. So that's why, you know, this, not just this award, but just being here with you guys and learning and, you know, sharing your stories, it just meant a lot to me. So with that being said, thank you guys so much. I'm really honored to be here, and thank you.
Time now for the Outstanding Investigative Journalist Award, and the guest who will make this award this evening in many ways couldn't be better qualified. Catherine Belton has become in many ways the emblem of how oligarchs use libel law, particularly British libel law, somewhat inconveniently, to silence critics. No fewer than 4 Russian oligarchs attempted to sue her after the publication of her last book. She successfully fought off Roman Abramovich, Peter Avon, Mikhail Friedman, and Shalva Chigirinsky, and, while she was at it, Rosneft. The first 3 of those oligarchs, as you'll no doubt be aware, are currently on the sanctions list. She also has the distinction of publicly confronting Vladimir Putin at the 2006 press conference after Bill Browder was expelled from Russia as a supposed threat to national security. This is just one of the astonishing stories that you can read about in Red Notice. It's a story worthy of its own book. I don't know yet whether Catherine is planning on writing it, but somebody should. Please join me in welcoming to the stage to present this year's award for Outstanding Investigative Journalist, a truly outstanding writer, Catherine Belton.
It's a great honor to be here with you again this evening, but it was really a much, much greater honor and privilege to meet a true journalistic hero this evening who is sitting next to me during this dinner. She's one of the bravest journalists I've ever met. She faced risks far graver than the ones we face in any UK courtroom. Lucy Casa has worked tirelessly and risked her own life to document and bring to life horrific war crimes being conducted by the Ethiopian army, Eritrean troops, and Tigrayan rebel forces in a brutal 2-year conflict which otherwise might not have been known about, were it not for Lucy's bravery and meticulous and dogged reporting in which she always took the utmost care to protect her sources. The stories of women who faced brutal, weaponized rapes and torture in this war would have gone untold. The world would not have known of the ethnic cleansing, hidden concentration camps, and use of starvation as a weapon of war that Lucy was able to document. The Ethiopian government wanted to make sure no one knew about any of this. They imposed a media blackout and blocked all communications and barred journalists from the conflict zones. But through sheer determination, Lucy was somehow able to break through all of this. She reached her sources and she brought these war crimes to light. Lucy has faced threats constantly, but they reached her home directly when in February 2021, 3 government security agents raided her home and threatened to her face to kill her if she continued to report on the war. At the time, Lucy was working on an investigation for the LA Times on a report on weaponized sexual violence. She was documenting the gang rape and torture of a 27-year-old mother by 15 Eritrean troops. These threats didn't stop Lucy, and she published her story anyway. The day the story was published, the Ethiopian government denounced her and claimed she wasn't a journalist. And then they launched a huge online hate campaign through their supporters who called for her to be silenced, stoned, and gang raped. These threats, not surprisingly, forced Lucy to have to leave her country, but she never gave up telling the story of those suffering war crimes in this terrible conflict. Since then, she's continued to work for The Guardian, for The Economist, and the BBC to document the human rights abuses of this conflict, continuing to tell the stories that no one else is able to tell. She's won awards for her work from Amnesty International. She's a real hero, and it's my great honor and privilege to present this award tonight to Lucy Casa for outstanding investigative journalism.
Thank you so much. Big thanks to nominators and the prize committee for selecting me to win this award. Thank you, Bill. I'm deeply honored. Weeks ago, I was exhausted of the pressures I had to face because of my work. I was feeling powerless, asking myself constantly what meaning my fight to shed light on the truth has if it will not hold the war criminals accountable. While in such frustration, I received an email that I have won this award. I felt so happy and said to Bill, this must be a conspiracy for me to carry on. So in the future, when I get tired and frustrated of impunity, this award will be my reminder that justice is possible. Today is my happy day. I don't want to think about the grim stories which kept me sleepless for the past 2 years. Just to say a few things, hundreds of thousands have been killed during the war in Ethiopia. Crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, potentially genocide is committed. Thousands of women were raped and weaponized sexual violence. Hunger has been used as a weapon of war against millions in the Tigray region. The reason I am persecuted is for exposing these war crimes. I'm relieved that a peace deal is recently signed, but accountability is not addressed. My message to you is to contribute in ensuring that the war criminals who caused such an immense suffering on millions of people with total impunity don't go unpunished. It's such a disgrace for humanity if the world lets them get away with it. My happiness will be full when the victims of war, whose stories I verified and told, particularly the thousands of women and girls, who are gang-raped and weaponized sexual violence get the justice they seek. I would like to thank my parents and siblings for their support. I wouldn't be here without their love. Thank you so much.
I think this is a timely moment to remind you of the words I shared at the beginning of this evening's proceedings, the words of Maria Ressa, the Nobel Peace Prize winner and Magnitsky laureate, who herself faces 100 years in jail in her native Philippines for the work that she does. What are you prepared to give up? After some of the people we've heard from this evening, that question, I think, assumes a new resonance. People who are prepared to give up livelihoods, prepared to give up liberty, and, in the final analysis perhaps, prepared to give up even their lives in pursuit of principle, in defense of truth, in service of integrity. But for most of us in this room, they're just words, aren't they? Because we're not going to face the questions that Lucy and our other recipients this evening have faced. We are almost certainly blessed with a degree of insulation from the urgency of the decisions that tonight's Magnitsky Prize winners face on a daily basis. These are the defining questions of their existence in many ways. But what you do achieve, what you are privileged to witness on a night like this, is the company of people who do live with these questions. And you may not know it as you clink glasses with someone that you've never met before, or break bread with a fascinating character from a distant country about which you know little. That's how I met Vladimir Kara-Murza, here. A huge, friendly presence. Perhaps the first face I would look for when I arrived at the ceremony, not least to find out which of his remarkable suits he would be wearing on this occasion. His tailor is almost as impressive as him. Vladimir, as many of you will know, is a Russian opposition politician, an activist, and a journalist, and last year, a guest at the Magnitsky Awards. In March, he traveled to Moscow to protest the war, was arrested, as he must have known was likely to happen, put in jail, and then issued with multiple trumped-up charges, culminating in a possible 24 years in jail for advocating the freedom of speech, for calling a war a war. Since the arrest of Vladimir, his wife, Evgenia, has taken on his work and his mission. She has traveled the world calling out Vladimir Putin for his murderous war and demanding that he release Russian political prisoners. She has quickly become as formidable a campaigner against Putin's diabolical regime as her imprisoned husband. And tonight, Evgenia is with us to present the Magnitsky Award for Outstanding Opposition Figure.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, James. Bill, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it is an honor to be here. In August 1968, 7 people went out into Moscow's Red Square to protest against the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. 7 people in the population of 300 million. Did they hope their act would change the regime in the country? Hardly. But you see, as Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia to crush the Prague Spring, the Kremlin put up enormous propaganda efforts to claim nationwide support for its action, all across the USSR. Trade unions, workers' collectives, academic institutes wrote letters of approval. Soviet newspapers reported that support for the invasion was unanimous. And then there were these 7. In an interview for my husband, Vladimir Kara-Murza's documentary about Soviet dissidents, one of those 7, Natalia Gorbanevskaya, said, "A nation minus one person is no longer an entire nation. A nation minus me is no longer an entire nation. A nation minus 10, 100, 1,000 people is no longer an entire nation." So that they could no longer say that there was a nationwide approval in the Soviet Union for the invasion of Czechoslovakia. This was the main outcome of that silent demonstration that didn't even last 5 minutes before its participants were beaten up and herded away. A silent demonstration of protest that ended up in lengthy prison sentences for 5 of them and in a forced psychiatric treatment for 2 of them. Because anyone contradicting the official narrative was then and is being again portrayed as either a criminal or an insane person. And yet they were seen. And their bravery was recognized, because later a Prague newspaper, Literárne Listy, wrote, "There are now at least 7 reasons for which we will never be able to hate the Russian people." Today, we are honoring yet another clear and honest voice that breaks through the madness and horror of Putin's propaganda about the Russian government's aggression against our closest neighbor, a voice that says, "Not in my name." Alexei Gorinov, a deputy at Moscow's Krasnoselsky District Council and trained lawyer, has for a long time been known in Moscow as a human rights activist and public defender, showing up to police stations and courtrooms to offer his services on days when the authorities carried out mass arrests. On July the 8th of this year, Alexei became the first person to receive a 7-year sentence in a penal colony for spreading, as the Russian government calls it, false information about the use of Russian armed forces in Ukraine. His crime was a statement that he made during a meeting of the Krasnoselsky District Council, in which he unequivocally denounced the Russian aggression and said it was inappropriate to hold a local children's art contest and dance recital while kids in Ukraine were dying daily. Needless to say, there was not one single false word in what he said. I am convinced that this war is the fastest route to dehumanization. When the line between good and evil is blurred, war is always violence and blood, torn bodies and severed limbs. It is always death. I do not accept this. I reject this, were his last words in court. What is courage? Courage that pushed Alexei Gorinov to speak out despite obvious risks of persecution and imprisonment. In the words of President Roosevelt, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. By his simple act of rejecting silent complicity and telling the truth, regardless of consequences, Alexei Gorinov demonstrated a strong and clear-cut example of civic courage in the face of an all-powerful repressive state. He has shown us yet again that moral courage can be stronger than military might. It is my great honor to present the 2022 Award for Outstanding Opposition Figure to Alexei Gorinov on behalf of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, and I would like to invite to this stage Denis Shadov, a board member of Human Rights Defense Center Memorial, to accept this award on Alexei's behalf.
Dear Evgenia, thank you for your words and for your spirit. Dear friends, dear Bill, thank you for this evening and for raising this very important topic, human rights. It's really very big honor and very big pleasure for me to represent here such a great person as Alexei Gorinov. And actually I have some letter from him. He wrote a couple of words and sent it to us from the jail. My friends, several circumstances beyond my control that have arisen around me at the moment and through no fault of my own have prevented me from being tonight with you at this gala event. I'm very sorry about this. Please accept my apologies. Allow me through my representatives to express my gratitude to you for such a high and perhaps even too excessive estimate of my importance in these recent events. Neither myself nor in general the thinking people in Russia were able to prevent this war. And they are not in position to stop it now, because the authorities have consciously deprived themselves of any means of feedback from civil society. I'm not a politician by any means, especially in a country where real politics is absent as an aspect of public life and where political activity itself is forbidden. But there are turning points in the history of each country when one cannot keep silent, when the responsibility for its present and future lies on all citizens of this country and on each and every one of them. At the same time, it may not always be pleasant or even safe to tell the truth. This political regime, which will be judged before the bar of history, has left us only one tribune for expressing our opinion, the judicial one, and that it's only for a select few. And as long as it remains at my disposal, I will speak. I will speak not only for myself, but also for those people who support me and share my views. I believe in the very best for my homeland, Russia. Let's work together to make it happen. Thank you for the award. Prisoner Alexei Gorinov. Thank you.
Семь лет лишения свободы. Много это или мало? Невообразимо много, но вспомните, скольких человек коснулась война в Украине, отобрав у них годы нормальной мирной жизни, а у кого-то и саму жизнь. Умножьте и почувствуйте космический масштаб событий, о которых здесь идет речь. Таков же масштаб ответственности, лежащий на каждом, включая и меня. И самое малое, что я могу, называть вещи своими именами. Хватит ли мне 7 лет, учитывая прожитое, чтобы перевоспитаться из пацифиста в ястреба, чтобы признать проводимую специальную военную операцию, не военной операцией, войной, а миротворческой акцией, несущей мир людям, чтобы научиться отрицать гибель гражданского населения, включая детей в ходе этой операции, чтобы призывать не к прекращению военных действий, а к их продолжению. Посмотрим. Посмотрим также, хватит ли этих 7 лет политическому руководству России, чтобы понять, какой катастрофе военной, социально-экономической, моральной, нравственной оно привело нашу страну. Невиданное со времен Второй мировой войны разрушение в европейской стране. Многие десятки погибших и раненых с обеих сторон. Миллионы беженцев. При этом нам ежедневно, ежечасно внушают, что это война во имя мира. приучают к тому, что убивать друг друга – это правильно и нормально. Нет, это не нормально. Это может казаться нормальным только в голове у одного или у нескольких человек, обладающих всей полнотой власти, всеми ее рычагами и отделивших себя от гражданского общества, от народа. Я хочу признать свою вину. Вину перед многострадальным народом Украины, перед всем мировым сообществом. Вину в том, что я, как гражданин своей страны, никак не смог предотвратить это безумие. Прошу простите за то, что, по-видимому, уже ничего не смогу сделать для его прекращения. Я говорю это и от имени множества моих подавленных страхом репрессий соотечественников, от которых получаю письма в свою поддержку. Осознавая неправомерность своих деяний, власти перекладывают на суды часть бремени ответственности за эти деяния, судорожно распихивая по тюрьмам и лагерям граждан за слово, за выражение мнения, за убеждение. Сама возможность возбуждения в 21 веке уголовных дел, подобных моему, возможность сегодняшнего судебного следствия – позор для нашей страны. Все это уже было в ее истории. Исходя из уроков нашего общего прошлого, ввиду неизбежно грядущего будущего России, я уже оправдан. Последнее слово, произнесенное Алексеем Гуриновым в Московском городском суде 19 сентября 2022 года.
Значит, подсудимому Гарусу, это, конечно, безобразие. Пресса, все, выходим. Все, пожалуйста, мы все, покидаем. Пресса, заканчиваем, покидаем. Все граждане, выходим. Выходим из помещения суда за нарушение общественного порядка.
Time now for our final award of the evening, and the guest here to present it this evening has, reluctantly, I suppose, become a familiar face in the UK media as she explains the history. Kira Rudik is the leader of the Golos Liberal political party in Ukraine and vice president of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Her current mission, her current campaign is as the main international advocate for taking the $350 million in billion, sorry, yeah, I was going to say, we could probably raise 350 million in this room tonight. $350 billion of Russian central bank reserves that are currently frozen by Western governments and put them to use for the defense and reconstruction of Ukraine. To this end, Kira has met with American, UK, Canadian, European lawmakers to get this money handed over. The job is not over. And here this evening to present the Magnitsky Award for Courage Under Fire, ladies and gentlemen, Kira Rudik.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure and honor being here. Every single time Ukrainian forces are liberating more and more cities that were under the occupation, we know that we will find there three things. First is a mass grave. Second is a torture room. And third, there would be a group of women that were raped. So when our forces liberated the city of Izum at the east of the country, there was a finding that shocked me the most, though I have seen so many things during this war. It was a box, plastic box in a torture room, full of dental crowns. This is something that I have only seen in Auschwitz. And it was a reminder for all of us that bravery has a price, that sometimes you have to sacrifice really a lot for being able to stand for your country and for the values that you believe at. I am honored today to give the Magnitsky Award to Yulia Payevska. She is a paramedic, a volunteer, and she's called Tyra. And she assembled a team of paramedics and volunteers that are called Tyra's Angels. And since the beginning of the war in 2014, she was helping out to get wounded soldiers to the safety. When she was asked how many souls she had saved, she said that she stopped counting at 600. Can you even imagine that? Can you even believe that? Like 600 people who are alive, breathing, fighting, loving, just because of something that she has done. And then the full-scale invasion started. And of course, Tyra was there in Mariupol. You all know this name, don't you? And in March, she was captured by Russians when she was trying to evacuate women and children. She has been in Russian captivity for 3 months, when she was subject to tortures and things that we cannot even imagine and cannot understand how it feels and would never be able to forget or forgive. I'm here on behalf of Magnitsky organization, but I'm also here on behalf of Ukrainian people to give an award to the person who is the proof that there is something bigger than us. There is something that you can not only die for, but suffer for, stand up for. Tyra, thank you so much for being our hero. Tyra, thank you so much for showing them that they cannot break us. Please come here. I'm so happy to give you this award.
Thank you. It's a great honor for me to receive this award. Also, the fact that this award exists makes me sad. I wish Sergei Magnitsky to live and be happy. I wish that Putin's criminal regime, which started this barbaric war against Ukraine, never exist. In my wishes come true, then neither Sergei nor I nor my brothers in arms would have ever suffered from this brutal regime of butchers from Russia. There would not have been so many deaths, pain, and misery. but it is brutal reality, and the history cannot be rewritten, no matter how hard the Moscow propagandist gang tries to. Right now, my brothers and sisters are fighting, defending the civilized war against the mad rules horde. Right now, my people, children, women, and men are being humiliated and tortured in concentration camps and torture chambers set up by the enemies on my land. Thousands of people went missing, tortured to death, slaughtered and killed by Russian missiles meant to destroy civilian infrastructure. All cities were wiped out from the face of earth. Why? Because of madman and his cronies have decided that they can rule the world. Why? Oh, what future they prepare for all of us? Why are my brothers in arms fighting for? They are fighting for our freedom, to get those butchers and murderers out of our homes. They are fighting not let the Kremlin madness put the world into the flames. It is extremely dangerous to underestimate the threat, even if your mind resists to take it in, to a scale of suffering. On behalf of every Ukrainian, I want to express my gratitude to democratic free countries for the military aid, for every air defense system, for every round of ammunition which saves lives of Ukrainians, for the financial aid allowing Ukrainians to live, to rebuild homes and power stations destroyed by the enemy, to look after for children and elders, to fight against the invaders and to get our land back. The bravery of our people, together with your aid, are going to let us defeat the enemy. Together we will save civilization from the force leading the world back into the dark times, times of Ivan the Terrible and Stalin Gulag. This war against evil and madness will be part of the history of mankind. The world's fate is now being settled in the Ukrainian field, which turned into the bloody battlefields. Glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the 2022 Magnitsky Award winners.